You and those brats can figure it out yourselves. I'm done playing house with you, Derek spat, his luxury car engine still running behind him. Maggie Morrison knelt on the wet pavement, one hand on her swollen belly, the other reaching for her crying 4-year-olds. Neighbors peeked through curtains, some recording on their phones, some shaking their heads, none stepping forward. The rain fell harder. Her daughter's small bodies shook with sobs. And she had nowhere to go. "Ma'am, are you okay?" Headlights cut through the storm. A deep voice, steady and calm. "You can't stay out here like this. Not with those babies. Let me help you." For the first time that night, someone saw her, not as a burden, not as a spectacle, but as a human being who deserved kindness. That moment of compassion would alter the trajectory of 4 lives forever. And it would uncover a truth so devastating, it would shake the very foundation of everything Maggie thought she knew about her past. What happened next? Stay with me. Hello, my beautiful family. Welcome back. Before we begin, I have a small but heartfelt request. Please subscribe. Your support is what keeps these stories alive. Every time you click that like button, you are helping us share voices that would otherwise be forgotten and stories that deserve to be heard. And in the comments, please tell us the city or country where you are watching from, because together we are not just sharing stories, we are keeping hope and faith alive. Maggie used to believe love could bridge any divide. She believed in second chances, in working through the hard seasons, in keeping her family together no matter the cost. But that belief had been slowly poisoned by the man who promised to protect her. 2 hours before the storm, the house was quiet except for the twins playing with their dolls in the corner and the sound of Maggie's wooden spoon stirring dinner on the stove. She'd made Derek's favorite, pot roast with garlic potatoes, hoping tonight would be different. But when she heard his car pull up, her stomach tightened. She knew the signs now. The way he slammed the door. The heavy footsteps. The silence that felt like a held breath before an explosion. Her daughters looked up, their bright eyes dimming as they recognized the sound too. "Is Daddy mad again?" one of them whispered. The door swung open. Derek didn't even look at her. "Where have you been?" she asked softly, her voice careful, like she was speaking to something wild. "Doesn't matter," he muttered, tossing his jacket onto the floor. "I'm leaving." Her heart stopped. "What do you mean leaving?" He finally looked at her, not with anger, but with something colder. "Disgust. I mean, you need to pack your things. You and those kids. Tonight." Maggie's hands trembled as she turned off the stove. The pot roast sat there, still steaming, filling the house with a smell that now made her nauseous. Behind her, the twins had gone silent, their dolls forgotten on the carpet as they watched their father with wide, frightened eyes. "Derek, please," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can we just talk about this? Whatever's wrong, we can." "Talk." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Just bitterness. "I'm done talking, Maggie. I've been done for months. Maybe years. I just didn't have the guts to say it." She pressed one hand against the counter to steady herself, the other instinctively moving to her belly. 8 months. The baby was due in 4 weeks. "I don't understand. What did I do wrong? What did you do wrong?" He turned to face her fully now, and she could smell it, the alcohol on his breath, sharp and sour. His eyes were bloodshot, his shirt wrinkled like he'd been wearing it for days. "You exist, Maggie. That's what you did wrong. You and those two," he gestured dismissively toward the twins. "You're all just weights around my neck." One of the girls, Maya, her brave one, stood up. "Daddy, don't yell at Mommy." "Sit down," Derek snapped, and Maya flinched like she'd been struck. Her sister Zoe started crying immediately, that quiet, hiccuping sob that always broke Maggie's heart. "Don't talk to them like that," Maggie said, moving between her daughters and her husband. Her fear was still there, coiled tight in her chest, but something else rose up beneath it, something fiercer. "Whatever you're angry about, they didn't do anything. They're here, aren't they?" His voice was getting louder now, and Maggie knew the neighbors could hear. Mrs. Patterson next door. The Johnsons across the street. Everyone would know by morning. For years of this. For years of pretending like I'm okay with this whole situation. Situation. The word felt like glass in her mouth. "They're your daughters, Derek. Your family. Are they?" He stepped closer, and she could see the cruelty settling into his features. transforming him into someone she didn't recognize. Sometimes I wonder, should have known better than to marry into this. Should have listened when people warned me. The room tilted. Maggie gripped the counter harder, her knuckles going pale. Warned you about what? You know exactly what. His lip curled. But I thought I could make it work. I thought maybe if I tried hard enough, if I gave you everything, you'd be different. But you're not. You'll never be. The words hung in the air like smoke, and Maggie felt something inside her crack. Not break, not yet, but crack like ice before it shatters. Say it, she whispered. Say what you really mean. He met her eyes, and for a moment, she thought she saw shame flicker there. But it was gone just as quickly, replaced by something darker. I mean, you and your kind are all the same. Needy. Dependent. Always wanting something. I gave you a house, a life, and what do I get? 2 kids I never wanted, and another one on the way to trap me even more. Behind her, both twins were crying now. Zoe had crawled to her sister, and they clung to each other, their small faces wet with tears they didn't fully understand. Maggie wanted to turn around, to hold them, but she couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Trap you. Her voice sounded far away, like it was coming from someone else. You wanted this baby. You said. I lied. He shrugged, casual as if he were discussing the weather. I thought maybe a boy would be different, would actually be worth something. But now, he gestured at her belly with disgust. Now I don't even care. Jennifer's pregnant, and that baby actually matters to me. The name landed like a punch. Jennifer. His colleague. The one he said was just a work friend. The one whose perfume Maggie had been smelling on his clothes for 6 months. You're having a baby with her? The words came out broken, barely words at all. Yeah. And she doesn't come with all this baggage. He looked around the house with contempt, at the girls' drawings taped to the refrigerator, at the family photos on the wall, at 8 years of their life together. She's sophisticated. She gets me. She doesn't need me to take care of her all the time. I never asked you to take care of me, Maggie said, her voice gaining strength even as tears started streaming down her face. I've worked. I've tried to help with part-time jobs at daycares. He scoffed. That's not a career, Maggie. That's a hobby. I've been carrying this family financially while you play house. I've been raising our children. Children I never wanted. He was shouting now, his face red, spit flying from his mouth. You got pregnant on purpose that first time. Don't think I don't know. You were so desperate to lock me down, to make sure I wouldn't leave. And then you did it again, twins. Like one burden wasn't enough. That's not true. But even as she said it, doubt crept in. Had she wanted to get pregnant too soon? Had some part of her been afraid of losing him even back then? Pack your things, he said suddenly, his voice going cold and flat. You and the girls. I want you out tonight. The world stopped. What? You heard me. This is my house. My name on the deed. You've got an hour to get whatever you can carry and get out. Derek, I'm 8 months pregnant. It's raining outside. Where am I supposed to go? Not my problem anymore. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through it like she wasn't even there. Call your friends. Call your family. Oh wait, he looked up with a mean smile. You don't have any, do you? Because I'm all you've got. Isn't that what you always said? It was true. She'd lost touch with everyone over the years. Derek had always said they didn't understand their relationship, that they judged him for being with her. And slowly, one by one, she'd let them all go. Her college friends. Her cousins. Even her mother's old friends from the community center. He'd convinced her they blamed her for the fire, for her mother's death. She was completely alone. Please, she whispered, hating herself for begging but unable to stop. I have nowhere to go. The girls. Then you should have thought about that before you trapped me. He turned away, heading toward the stairs. 1 hour, Maggie. Or I'm calling the police to remove you. The police? She followed him, her pregnant belly making her movements awkward. You can't just throw out your pregnant wife and children. That's not legal. They'll what? He spun around, and for the first time, she saw real hatred in his eyes. Take my side. A successful businessman kicking out his ungrateful wife, who's been living off him for years? Yeah, I like my chances. He was halfway up the stairs when he stopped, looking back at her. And Maggie, don't even think about taking anything valuable. I've got cameras everywhere. Anything you take, I'll have you arrested for theft." Then he was gone, his footsteps heavy on the floor above as he went into their bedroom and slammed the door. Maggie stood at the bottom of the stairs, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her chest. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be real. "Mommy." Maya's small voice broke through her paralysis. "Are we leaving?" She turned to see her daughters standing hand in hand, their matching faces streaked with tears, their brown eyes huge with fear. They were only 4 years old. 4 years old, and their father had just thrown them away like garbage. Something hardened in Maggie's chest. Not strength, not yet, but something sharp-edged and determined. She would not let them see her fall apart. Not completely. "Yes, baby," she said, kneeling down despite her aching back and pulling both girls into her arms. "We're leaving. But it's going to be okay. Mommy's going to figure this out." "Where are we going?" Zoe asked, her voice muffled against Maggie's shoulder. Maggie had no answer. She just held them tighter, breathing in their little girl smell, strawberry shampoo and graham crackers, and tried to will her heart to slow down. The baby kicked hard against her ribs as if in protest. She had to move, had to think, had to do something. With shaking hands, she gathered what she could. Clothes thrown into garbage bags, toiletries swept from the bathroom counter, the girl's favorite stuffed animals, a few diapers she'd already bought for the baby. Her movements were mechanical, robotic, her brain unable to fully process what was happening. The twins helped in their clumsy, innocent way, dragging their small backpacks, asking questions she couldn't answer. Where would they sleep? Would they see Daddy again? Why was Daddy so angry? When the hour was almost up, she dragged the bags to the front door. Rain hammered against the windows now, the storm that had been threatening all evening finally breaking open. Of course it would rain. She tried her phone, one last desperate attempt to call someone, anyone. Her cousin in Detroit, her old roommate from college. But the screen flickered and died. Dead battery. She'd forgotten to charge it, distracted by dinner and hope and the stupid belief that tonight might be different. Derek appeared at the top of the stairs, his face impassive. "Time's up. Can I at least wait until the rain?" "Now, Maggie." She gathered the twins close, covering their heads with her cardigan as she opened the door. The rain hit her immediately, cold and brutal. She grabbed what bags she could carry, the girls clinging to her dress, and stepped out into the storm. Behind her, Derek started throwing more bags onto the porch, not bothering to hand them to her, just tossing them like trash. Clothes spilled out, getting soaked instantly. The twins' school artwork. A framed photo of her mother. Neighbors' porch lights flickered on. She could see faces in windows, watching. Mrs. Patterson across the street stood on her porch, phone raised, recording. But no one moved to help. No one called out. They just watched, bearing witness to her humiliation. Maggie tried to gather the scattered belongings, but there was too much, and the rain was too hard, and the girls were crying too loudly, and her belly was too heavy, and she couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't. She sank to the curb, her girls plastered to her sides, rain pouring down all three of them. Her hair stuck to her face. Her dress clung to her pregnant belly. Maya's teeth were chattering. Zoe had stopped crying and gone silent, that terrible shock silence of a child who's seen too much. Maggie looked up at the house that had been her home for 6 years. The windows glowed warm and yellow. Inside, Derek moved around casually, turning on the TV, getting a beer from the fridge. Already forgetting them. She wrapped her arms around her daughters and closed her eyes. "God," she prayed silently, "please. I don't know what to do. I don't know where to go. Please help us. Please don't let my babies suffer for my mistakes. Please." The rain answered her with its cold, indifferent downpour. And then headlights. Coming closer, slowing down. A car pulling to a stop beside them. A door opening. Footsteps approaching. "Ma'am." A man's voice, deep and concerned. "Are you okay?" Maggie looked up through the rain, blinking water from her eyes. The man standing over them was tall, maybe early 40s, with gray threading through his dark hair. He wore an expensive suit that was already getting soaked, but he didn't seem to notice or care. His face was etched with genuine concern as he took in the scene. A pregnant woman and 2 small children huddled on a curb surrounded by wet garbage bags. "I'm fine," Maggie said automatically, the lie bitter on her tongue. We're fine. The man glanced at the twins shivering against her sides, at her soaked dress clinging to her pregnant belly, at the scattered belongings floating in puddles around them. Ma'am, with all due respect, you're not fine. None of you are. He pulled out his phone. I'm calling for help. No, please don't. Maggie struggled to stand, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. The weight of the baby, the cold, the shock of the last hour. Everything was catching up to her at once. We don't need the police. We just need. I'm not calling the police, he said gently, already dialing. Marcus? I need you at the corner of Maple and 7th. Bring blankets, dry clothes if we have any in the car, and those emergency supplies we keep. Yes, now. He ended the call and crouched down to their level, careful not to crowd them. My name is Richard Greenleaf. I'm not going to hurt you or your daughters. But I can't drive past 3 people in a storm and pretend I didn't see them. Maya, always the braver twin, peered up at him through wet eyelashes. Our daddy made us leave. Maya. Maggie started, but Richard held up a hand. It's okay. He looked at Maya with such kindness that Maggie felt something in her chest twist painfully. That must have been very scary. He was yelling, Zoe whispered, her teeth chattering so hard she could barely get the words out. And Mommy cried. Richard's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his voice stayed gentle. Well, you're very brave girls for staying strong with your mom. How about we get you somewhere warm and dry? Would that be okay? Maggie wanted to say no. Wanted to maintain some shred of dignity, some independence. But Zoe's teeth were chattering audibly now, and Maya's lips had a bluish tint, and her own hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold her daughters close. We don't need charity, she managed, but the words came out weak, unconvincing even to her own ears. It's not charity, Richard said simply. It's human decency. Something you should have received from the people in those houses. He glanced back at the glowing windows, at the neighbors who'd watched and done nothing, and disgust flickered across his features. Another car pulled up, a sleek sedan. A younger man in a driver's uniform jumped out carrying an armful of blankets and what looked like a gym bag. Mr. Greenleaf, I brought everything I could find. Good man, Marcus. Richard took the blankets and immediately wrapped one around each shivering twin, then draped the largest one over Maggie's shoulders. The warmth was instantaneous and overwhelming. Maggie felt tears spring to her eyes and fought them back. She'd already cried enough tonight. Marcus was already gathering their scattered belongings, treating each soggy garbage bag like it contained treasures. I'll get all of this, ma'am. Don't you worry. I have a guest house on my property, Richard said to Maggie, his tone leaving no room for argument, but somehow not feeling pushy. It's empty, it's warm, and it has everything you need for tonight. Tomorrow, when you've rested, we can figure out your next steps. But right now, you need to get your daughters out of this rain. Maggie looked down at her girls. Maya's shivering had gotten worse, and Zoe had pressed her face into Maggie's side, making small whimpering sounds that broke what was left of Maggie's heart. The decision made itself. Okay, she whispered. Thank you. Richard helped her to her feet with a steady hand under her elbow, mindful of her pregnant belly. Marcus had already loaded their bags into the trunk and was holding the back door open. The interior of the car looked impossibly warm and dry, the leather seats pristine. I'll get everything wet, Maggie protested weakly. It's a car, Richard said with a small smile. It'll dry. Your daughters won't if we stand here debating. He helped the twins in first, making sure they were buckled safely, then assisted Maggie. The relief of sitting down, of being out of the rain, of feeling warm air from the vents. It was almost painful in its intensity. Richard climbed into the front passenger seat, and Marcus pulled away from the curb smoothly. Through the rear window, Maggie could see her old house getting smaller. Derek's silhouette passed by a window upstairs. He didn't even look out. How far along are you? Richard asked, turning slightly to look at her. 8 months, Maggie said quietly. Due in 4 weeks. And you have somewhere you can go tomorrow? Family? Friends? The question hung in the air. Maggie looked down at her lap, at her hands twisting the blanket between her fingers. Not really. We moved here 6 years ago and I lost touch with most people. Lost touch, or were kept from them? The question was gentle but piercing. Maggie's head snapped up. Richard was watching her with an understanding that suggested he'd seen situations like this before. Maybe not exactly like this, but close enough. Both, she admitted, the word barely audible over the twins' soft sniffling. Mommy, where are we going? Maya asked, her voice small and afraid in a way that made Maggie want to scream. Somewhere safe, baby, Maggie said, pulling both girls closer. I promise. Richard turned to look at the twins, his expression softening. Do you girls like hot chocolate? Both girls nodded hesitantly. Well, we have the best hot chocolate you've ever tasted at my house. And my housekeeper, Mrs. Chun, makes these cookies that are magic. They make everything better. I think she'd love to meet two brave girls like you. With marshmallows? Zoe asked tentatively, the first full sentence she'd spoken since getting in the car. With as many marshmallows as you want, Richard promised. They drove for about 20 minutes, moving from their modest neighborhood into an area Maggie had only ever seen from a distance. The houses here were estates, set back from the road behind gates and manicured lawns. When Marcus turned into a long driveway flanked by old oak trees, Maggie felt a surge of panic. This is too much, she said. We can't. The guest house is separate from the main house, Richard said calmly. It has its own entrance, full privacy. You're not imposing, I promise. The car stopped in front of a house that was bigger than any place Maggie had ever lived. Warm light glowed from every window, and the front door opened before they'd even gotten out. An Asian woman in her 60s appeared, her face creased with concern. Mr. Richard, Marcus called ahead. I've prepared the blue suite. It has the room with the twin beds for the little ones, yes? Perfect, Mrs. Chun. Richard helped Maggie out while Mrs. Chun immediately focused on the twins, making soft cooing sounds and wrapping them in fresh, warm towels she'd brought from inside. Oh, you poor little dumplings, she murmured. So cold, so wet. Come, come, Mrs. Chun will fix this. The house was overwhelming in its elegance. Crown molding, hardwood floors, artwork that looked expensive hanging on cream-colored walls. Maggie felt acutely aware of the trail of water she was leaving, of her cheap dress and bare feet. She'd lost her shoes somewhere in the chaos. Mrs. Chun will take the girls upstairs for warm baths, Richard said. There's a suite ready for you right next to theirs. Everything you need should be there, clothes, toiletries, towels. If something's missing, just ask. But I can bathe them, Maggie protested. They're my responsibility. Mama needs a warm bath too, Mrs. Chun said firmly but kindly. You take care of yourself, take care of that baby. I have granddaughters. I know how to handle little ones. They'll be safe with me, I promise. Maya and Zoe looked at Maggie uncertainly. Every instinct screamed at her to keep them close, to not let them out of her sight. But they were still shivering, still soaked, and Mrs. Chen's warm, grandmotherly energy was already working its magic on them. Is that okay? Maggie asked her daughters. Can you be brave for a little bit while I get cleaned up too? Maya nodded slowly. Will you be close by? Right next door, Richard assured them. Your mama will be one door away the whole time. Mrs. Chun took their small hands in hers. Come, sweethearts. Let's get you warm and dry, and then we'll have that hot chocolate Mr. Richard promised. With extra marshmallows. Maggie watched them go, Mrs. Chun chattering soothingly about her own granddaughters and a cat named Mr. Whiskers who lived somewhere in the house. The twins looked back once, and Maggie gave them the bravest smile she could manage. When they disappeared upstairs, Maggie's knees buckled. Richard caught her elbow, steadying her. Let's get you upstairs too, he said gently. Marcus is bringing your bags up. The suite has everything you need. He guided her up the curved staircase. She barely registered the journey, to a door at the end of a hallway. Inside was a room more beautiful than any hotel she'd ever seen. A massive bed with white linens. A sitting area with a couch. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking gardens she couldn't see in the dark. And through another door, a bathroom that looked like something from a magazine. Your daughters are just through that door. Richard pointed to a connecting door she hadn't noticed. You can check on them whenever you want. Mrs. Chun will bring them back to you as soon as they're bathed and fed. Maggie nodded, still numb, still not quite believing this was real. Take your time, Richard said. We'll talk in the morning. For tonight, just rest. You're safe here. All three of you, he glanced at her belly. All four of you. Then he was gone, closing the door softly behind him. Maggie stood in the middle of the beautiful room, dripping water on the expensive rug, and didn't know what to do with herself. Through the wall, she could hear Mrs. Chen's cheerful voice and the twins' tentative laughter. They were okay. They were safe. She walked into the bathroom like she was in a dream. The shower was enormous, all glass and chrome, with multiple shower heads. She turned the water on as hot as it would go and stepped under the spray fully clothed, watching her ruined dress darken under the water before finally peeling it off. And then, finally alone, finally in a place where her daughters couldn't see her, Maggie let herself break. She sank down to the marble floor of the shower, pulled her knees up as much as her pregnant belly would allow, and sobbed. Great, heaving sobs that tore out of her chest and echoed off the tiles. She cried for her marriage, for her mother, for 6 years of slowly losing herself, for the terrified looks on her daughters' faces, for everything she'd lost and everything she'd never really had. The water washed it all down the drain. Tears rain, the last remnants of the woman who'd woken up that morning still believing she had a home. When there were no tears left, she finally stood, washed herself properly, and stepped out. Someone, Mrs. Chun probably, had left soft pajamas on the counter. They fit perfectly. Of course they did. This whole place felt like a dream, like she'd stumbled into someone else's life. She opened the connecting door quietly. The bedroom beyond held 2 small beds, and in each one, a sleeping daughter. They were clean, their hair damp and combed, wearing matching pink pajamas. Each clutched a stuffed animal she didn't recognize, gifts probably. Their breathing was soft and even, their faces peaceful. Maggie stood in the doorway and watched them sleep. Safe, warm, dry. For the first time since Derek had come home drunk and angry, her daughters were okay. A soft knock made her turn. Richard stood in the hallway, his expression gentle. They fell asleep right after their hot chocolate, he said quietly. Mrs. Chun said they were exhausted. Thank you, Maggie whispered. The words felt inadequate for what he'd done, but they were all she had. I don't know how I'll ever repay. You don't have to repay kindness, Richard interrupted gently. You just have to accept it. And rest. Tomorrow we'll figure out next steps. But tonight you're safe here. All 3 of you. He started to leave, then paused. If you need anything, anything at all, there's a phone by your bed. Just pick it up and someone will help. Don't hesitate. After he left, Maggie climbed into the massive bed. Through the open connecting door, she could see her daughters sleeping. The baby kicked softly, as if to remind her of its presence. For the first time in hours, maybe years, Maggie let herself believe it. They were safe. 3 days passed like a dream Maggie was afraid to wake from. The twins adapted with the resilience of children, running through the estate's gardens, playing with Mrs. Chen's cat, eating meals at a table where no one yelled. Maggie watched them rediscover laughter, and each giggle felt like a small miracle. But her body was keeping score in ways her mind tried to ignore. By day 3, her hands had begun to swell, her wedding ring cutting into her finger until she finally worked it off. Headaches throbbed behind her eyes. She told herself it was normal. 8 months pregnant. Traumatized. Of course her body was reacting. The pain hit at 3 in the morning. Sharp. Visceral. Like something inside her was being torn apart. Maggie woke gasping, both hands flying to her stomach. The room spun. Another wave of pain crashed through her. So intense she couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but curl onto her side and try not to scream. Help, she managed, then louder. Help! The connecting door burst open. Maya stood there in her pink pajamas, eyes wide with terror. Mommy! Baby, go get. Another wave of pain cut off her words. I'll get Mr. Richard. Maya's footsteps pounded away. Mr. Richard. Mommy's sick. Richard appeared moments later, took one look at Maggie, and pulled out his phone. I need an ambulance at 1847 Greenleaf Drive. Pregnant woman, 8 months, severe abdominal pain. Mrs. Chun materialized beside him. How long have you had swelling? 2 days, Maggie gasped. Maybe 3. Mrs. Chun and Richard exchanged a look that made Maggie's heart drop. Zoe had woken and stood clinging to her sister, both twins crying in that terrible silent way children do when they're too frightened to make noise. Mrs. Chun gathered them into her arms. Your mama is going to be just fine, she said with certainty. Mr. Richard is taking her to the hospital. You girls are staying with me, and we're going to make breakfast and say prayers for Mommy." She ushered them out despite their protests, and Maggie wanted to call them back, but another wave of pain stole her breath. "Stay with me," Richard said, his hand cool on her forehead. "The ambulance is 5 minutes away. Tell me about your daughters." "Maya's the brave one," Maggie managed. "Zoe feels everything so deeply. They're such good girls." "They are," Richard agreed. "And they need their mother. So you're going to fight through this." When the paramedics arrived, they worked quickly. Blood pressure 170/110. Significant edema. Possible preeclampsia. "We need to move." In the ambulance, with sirens screaming and her body betraying her, Maggie felt Richard take her hand. She gripped it like a lifeline. "Why are you doing this?" she asked through the pain. "You don't even know me." Richard's expression was complicated, guilt and grief. "Because someone should have been there for you a long time ago," he said quietly. "And I'm sorry they weren't." The hospital was a blur of bright lights and urgent voices. A doctor examined her quickly. "Severe preeclampsia," she announced. "Blood pressure dangerously high. We need to admit her immediately." "The baby?" Maggie asked, terror in her voice. "Your baby's heartbeat is strong," the doctor said, and tears of relief streamed down Maggie's face. "But the stress your body has been under has taken a serious toll." The doctor's next words were blunt. "Any more stress could be fatal. For you and the baby. Your blood pressure is at stroke level. You need complete bed rest for the remainder of your pregnancy. No stress. Otherwise, we're looking at emergency delivery, possible seizures or worse." "But my daughters will be taken care of," Richard interjected. "I promise." They admitted her to the maternity ward. Nurses came and went, monitoring machines beeping steadily. Richard stayed in the waiting room despite nurses trying to send him home. Around noon, Maggie woke to see Richard in the doorway. "Mr. Greenleaf has been very insistent you be allowed visitors," a nurse said with a smile. "Two very small, very worried visitors." "My girls? Mrs. Chen is bringing them up now," Richard said. 15 minutes maximum." Maya and Zoe burst through the door, Mrs. Chen's hands on their shoulders. They stopped when they saw their mother connected to wires and machines, their faces crumpling. "Come here, babies," Maggie said, voice breaking. "I'm okay." They climbed onto the bed carefully, and Maggie wrapped her arms around them. They smelled like cookies and strawberry shampoo. Normal things. Safe things. "Are you sick, Mommy?" Zoe whispered. "I was," Maggie said honestly. "But the doctors are making me better. I just need to rest." They lay together, the twins pressed against their mother's sides, and Maggie felt her blood pressure ease just from having them close. When the nurse came to collect the girls, it broke Maggie's heart. "I want to stay with Mommy," Zoe cried. "But Mommy needs to rest so she and the baby can be strong," Mrs. Chen said, scooping her up. "We're going home to make her special soup and draw pictures for her room." "And then we can come back?" Maya asked. "Every day," Richard promised. "I'll bring you to visit every single day until your mama comes home." After they left, Richard returned with coffee for himself and juice for Maggie, settling into the chair beside her bed. "The doctor says you'll be here at least a week," he said. "After that, complete bed rest until the baby comes." "I can't afford," Maggie started. "Already handled," Richard interrupted gently. "Don't argue, it's done." "Why?" The question burst out, raw and desperate. "Why are you doing all of this?" "I'm just—" "You're not just anything," Richard said firmly. "And I know more than you think I do." Something in his tone made Maggie go still. "What does that mean?" Richard was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with guilt. "I knew your mother, Clara Morrison. We were business partners a long time ago." The world tilted. "You knew my mother?" "I did. And I failed her." Richard met her eyes, genuine pain there. "When I saw you on that curb 3 nights ago, I recognized you immediately. You looked just like her." Maggie's mind raced. "The community center. You were involved with it. I helped fund it, helped her build it. It was going to change everything." His hands tightened around his cup. "When it burned down, when she died, I couldn't find you. Your boyfriend at the time." "Derek," Maggie whispered. "He said you wanted nothing to do with anything connected to your mother's failure. That you'd moved on. I believed him. I should have looked harder." The room spun. All those years. All that time lost. And Richard had been looking for her. Your daughters need their mother healthy, Richard said. When you're discharged, come back to my house. Stay as long as you need. Let me give you the safe place your mother would have wanted for you. Maggie looked at this man who was a stranger but somehow not, who'd known her mother, who'd stopped his car on a rainy night and changed everything. Okay, she whispered. Because for the first time since her mother died, she wasn't alone. And maybe there was more to this story than she'd ever known. Richard nodded, relief on his face. Get some rest. Your daughters will be back tomorrow. And Maggie, you're safe now. I promise. After he left, Maggie closed her eyes. She was safe. Her daughters were safe. And somewhere in this impossible situation, there were answers about her mother she'd been searching for her whole life. The baby kicked gently, and Maggie finally let herself sleep. The weeks that followed felt like watching flowers bloom after a long winter. Slowly, carefully, life began to take root again. Maggie spent 10 days in the hospital before the doctors cleared her for discharge with strict orders. Bed rest, no stress, weekly monitoring. Richard had arranged everything. A medical-grade bed in her suite, a nurse who visited 3 times a week, monitors that tracked her blood pressure around the clock. She'd protested at first, overwhelmed by the expense, the kindness, the sheer impossibility of it all. But Richard had simply looked at her with those eyes that held too many secrets and said, "Let me do this. Please." So she did. The twins adjusted with a resilience that broke Maggie's heart and put it back together at the same time. Within 2 weeks, Richard had enrolled them in a prestigious preschool 10 minutes from the estate. Maggie had worried. Would they fit in? Would the other children accept them? Would the teachers see 2 traumatized little girls, or just problem students? She shouldn't have worried. Maya came home on the 3rd day chattering about a girl named Sophie who had the same purple backpack. Zoe, quieter as always, mentioned a teacher named Miss Jennifer who read stories with funny voices and let her feed the class rabbit. They made paintings that Mrs. Chun hung on the refrigerator. They learned songs Maggie had never heard. They laughed, real, unburdened laughter that sounded nothing like the nervous giggles they'd made in Derek's house. "Mommy, guess what?" Maya bounced into Maggie's room one afternoon, still in her school uniform. "Mr. Richard is teaching us chess. He says I'm a natural. And he reads us stories before bed," Zoe added, climbing carefully onto the bed beside her mother. "Different ones than Mrs. Chun. His have dragons." Maggie smiled, smoothing Zoe's hair back from her face. "That's wonderful, baby. Are you being good for him?" "We're very good," Maya said seriously. "Because Mr. Richard saved us. That's what Mrs. Chun says. So we have to be good forever." Something twisted in Maggie's chest. Her 4-year-old daughters understood debt, obligation, gratitude in ways children shouldn't have to. But before she could say anything, Richard appeared in the doorway with that gentle expression he always wore around the girls. "Ready for our chess lesson, ladies?" he asked, and both twins scrambled off the bed with excited squeals. He paused at the door, looking back at Maggie. "You should see Maya's strategy. She's already thinking 3 moves ahead." After they left, their voices fading down the hallway, Maggie lay back against her pillows and tried to reconcile this version of her life with the one she'd left behind. 2 months ago, she'd been kneeling on a rain-soaked curb with nothing. Now her daughters had chess lessons and bedtime stories and a preschool where they were thriving. It felt too good to be true, which meant, according to every lesson life had taught her, that it probably was. By the end of her first month in Richard's home, the doctors cleared her for light activity. She could move around the house, go for short walks in the garden, sit at a desk for a few hours. What she couldn't do was return to work. Not that she had work to return to. The part-time daycare job she'd held before had let her go after 2 weeks of no-shows. Richard had a solution for that too. The Greenleaf Foundation focuses on community development, he explained one morning over breakfast in her suite. We fund programs for underserved populations, job training, housing assistance, youth mentorship. I could use someone with your perspective. My perspective? Maggie had laughed, bitter and surprised. I'm a homeless pregnant woman living on charity. What perspective could I possibly offer? Exactly that one. Richard's voice was firm. You know what these programs need because you've needed them. You understand the gaps in the system because you've fallen through them. I can throw money at problems all day, but without insight from people who've lived these struggles, it's just wealthy people guessing. So Maggie became a consultant for the Greenleaf Foundation. She worked from her laptop a few hours each day, reviewing grant proposals and program designs, offering input on initiatives for single mothers and domestic violence survivors. At first, it felt strange, almost fraudulent, to be paid for her opinions. But as the weeks passed, she found herself genuinely engaged. These programs could have helped her 6 months ago, a year ago, back when she'd first started to feel the walls closing in. She poured herself into the work, designing workshops on financial literacy for women leaving abusive relationships, suggesting partnerships with legal aid organizations, advocating for childcare subsidies that would let mothers attend job training without worrying about their babies. Richard listened to every idea, implemented most of them, and treated her contributions like they mattered. Like she mattered. The estate staff noticed. Of course they did. Maggie caught the whispers in hallways, the speculative looks between the housekeeper and the gardener, the way the cook smiled knowingly when she saw Richard and Maggie reviewing documents together in the library. She heard the theories: mistress, secret girlfriend, long-lost daughter, charity case he'd grown attached to. None of them were quite right, but Maggie couldn't explain the truth because she didn't fully understand it herself. Why was Richard doing all of this? Yes, he'd known her mother. Yes, he felt guilty about something. But this level of generosity, this complete appending of his household to accommodate a stranger and her children, it went beyond guilt. It felt personal in ways Maggie couldn't quite grasp. She started paying more attention to the house itself, looking for clues in the spaces Richard had built around himself. The library became her favorite room during her limited hours of activity. Floor-to-ceiling books, leather chairs, windows overlooking the garden where her daughters played. But more than the books, she noticed the photographs. They lined the walls in elegant frames. Richard at various ages, shaking hands with dignitaries, cutting ribbons at building openings, speaking at podiums. And in many of them, especially the older ones, there was a woman. Black, beautiful, with an elegant presence that commanded attention even in still images. She appeared beside Richard at what looked like charity galas, community events, the opening of what might have been a school or community center. Maggie found herself drawn to these photos, studying the woman's face. There was something familiar about her smile, the way she held herself, the intelligence in her eyes. But Maggie couldn't quite place it. Until one afternoon, when she was looking at a photo from what the small plaque indicated was 2005. The woman stood beside a much younger Richard in front of a building draped in a red ribbon, both of them smiling broadly. Behind them, a sign read, Morrison Community Center. Maggie's hand flew to her mouth. She stepped closer, her heart pounding. That woman was her mother. Clara Morrison, younger than Maggie remembered her, vibrant and alive in a way that the stress-worn woman of Maggie's final memories hadn't been. Her mother, standing shoulder to shoulder with Richard Greenleaf like they were partners. Like they were friends. I failed her mother. I won't fail her too. The words came back to her now, fragments of a phone conversation she'd overheard 3 days ago when she'd been walking past Richard's office. She'd kept moving then, not wanting to eavesdrop, but the words had stuck with her like burrs. Now they made terrible, perfect sense. That evening, after the twins were asleep and Mrs. Chun had retired for the night, Maggie sat in her room with her laptop and typed words she'd been afraid to search for years. Morrison Community Center Fire 2008. The articles loaded one by one, each headline worse than the last. Community Center destroyed in suspicious fire. Fire investigators suspect arson in Morrison Center blaze. Community leader Clara Morrison dies of heart attack after witnessing center burn. Maggie read through them all, her hands shaking, tears streaming down her face. Her mother's dream, the community center she'd poured her heart and savings into, had burned to the ground on a Tuesday night in March. Clara had been there, working late on grant applications. She'd escaped the fire physically unharmed, but watching everything she'd built turn to ash had triggered a massive heart attack. She'd died in the ambulance before reaching the hospital. The fire investigation had found evidence of accelerant use. Arson was suspected, but never proven. The case had gone cold within months, chalked up to random vandalism or neighborhood rivalry. The insurance payout had been delayed, disputed, eventually settled for far less than the center was worth. And through it all, Maggie had been with Derek. 22 years old, grieving her mother, lost and alone. Derek had been so supportive then, or so she'd thought. He'd encouraged her to move away from the old neighborhood, to start fresh, to leave behind the painful memories. He'd isolated her so gradually she hadn't even noticed it happening. Now, reading these articles in the safety of Richard's guest room, Maggie saw it clearly. Derek had kept her away from everyone who'd known her mother. Away from the investigation, the memorial services, the community that would have supported her. He'd made her believe that her mother's death was somehow shameful, that the center's failure reflected poorly on her. And Richard had been looking for her all this time. A soft knock on her door made her close the laptop quickly, wiping at her tears. "Come in." Richard entered, his expression concerned. "I saw your light still on. Are you okay? Is it the baby?" "I'm fine," Maggie said, but her voice betrayed her. I found the photos. In the library. Of you and my mother." Richard went very still. Then he moved into the room slowly, carefully, like she was something fragile that might shatter. "I was going to tell you," he said. "I've been trying to find the right time, but there never seemed to be one." "Tell me now." Maggie's voice was steadier than she felt. "Tell me everything. Please." So Richard sat in the chair beside her bed, and in the quiet darkness, with only a bedside lamp for light, he finally told her the truth. Richard sat in the chair beside Maggie's bed, his hands clasped between his knees, and for a long moment he didn't speak. The silence stretched between them, heavy with 15 years of secrets and missed connections. "Your mother saved my life," he finally said, his voice quiet but steady. "Not literally, but in every way that mattered." Maggie pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, her pregnant belly a reminder of how much hung in the balance. "Tell me." Richard stood and walked to the window, looking out at the dark garden where her daughters had played that afternoon. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of old grief. "I was 25 when I met Clara. Fresh out of business school, full of ideas and ambition, but completely lost. I'd gotten some startup capital from investors who wanted to gentrify the neighborhood where I grew up, push out the existing residents, bring in coffee shops and condos, make a profit. I was going to go along with it because I thought that's what success looked like." He turned to face her. "Your mother ran the community center that was supposed to be demolished to make way for the first development phase. She invited me to tour it before I signed the contracts. Said I should see what I was destroying." Maggie could picture it so clearly. Her mother with that fierce determination she'd had, refusing to let anyone ignore the human cost of their decisions. "She showed me everything," Richard continued, moving back to the chair. "The after-school programs where kids did homework because their parents worked double shifts. The job training center where adults learned computer skills. The food pantry that fed 300 families a month. She introduced me to every person we passed, Miss Johnson who taught literacy classes, Mr. Washington who ran the youth basketball league, teenagers who had safe places to go instead of the streets." His eyes were distant now, seeing a past Maggie had only glimpsed in childhood fragments. "Then she took me to her office, gave me coffee in a chipped mug, and said, 'You can make money destroying communities, or you can make a difference building them. Only one of those will let you sleep at night.'" Maggie felt tears sliding down her cheeks. That was so perfectly her mother, direct, uncompromising, but somehow never cruel. "I walked away from that development deal," Richard said. "Lost my initial investors, my business partner, half my contacts. But I went back to your mother and asked her to teach me how to do it right. She laughed at me, said I was either the bravest fool she'd met or the most foolish brave man. But she took me on as a partner." "Partner?" Maggie whispered. "We co-founded the Morrison Community Center," Richard said, and there was pride in his voice now, mixed with the grief. "I brought the business expertise and the fundraising connections. She brought the vision, the community trust, the understanding of what people actually needed. We spent 3 years building that center into something extraordinary." He pulled out his phone, scrolled through old photos, and handed it to Maggie. She saw image after image. Her mother and young Richard painting walls, hanging signs, shaking hands with city officials, standing surrounded by smiling children. In every photo, Clara Morrison radiated purpose and joy. "We were planning to expand," Richard continued. 3 more centers in underserved neighborhoods. Your mother had drawn up the plans herself, each one tailored to the specific community it would serve. We had the funding secured, the permits approved. Everything was ready. His voice cracked. And then someone burned it down. Maggie's hand went to her mouth. The fire. March 18th, 2008. Richard's hands clenched into fists. Clara was working late, finishing grant paperwork. She smelled smoke around 11 p.m. and got out safely, physically at least. But watching everything she'd built turn to ash. He couldn't finish the sentence. She had a heart attack, Maggie whispered. In the ambulance. I was in New York at a fundraising gala, Richard said, and the guilt in his voice was raw. I got the call while I was on stage accepting an award. By the time I got back, she was gone. And you, he looked at Maggie with such pain. You had disappeared. Disappeared? Maggie's mind raced. I was at the funeral. I was there. I know. I saw you from across the cemetery. You were with that young man, Derek. I tried to approach you after the service, but he said you were too distraught, that you needed space. He gave me his number, said he'd have you call me when you were ready. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. I never got that message. I know that now, Richard said. I called the number he gave me dozens of times. It was disconnected within a week. I went to your mother's apartment, but the landlord said you'd moved out, left no forwarding address. I hired investigators, but they couldn't find any trace of you. It was like you'd vanished. He moved us, Maggie said, her voice hollow. 2 weeks after the funeral. Said we needed a fresh start, away from all the painful memories. I thought he was being supportive. He was isolating you. Richard's voice hardened. From everyone who'd known your mother, everyone who could have told you the truth about the center, everyone who might have helped you. Maggie thought about all those years. The way Derek had discouraged her from contacting her mother's old friends. How he'd convinced her that the community blamed her for Clara's death, that she should be ashamed of the center's failure. The subtle ways he'd cut her off from every support system until he was all she had. Why? She asked. Why would he do that? Richard's expression darkened. I've been trying to figure that out for 15 years. At first, I thought he was just controlling. But now, knowing what he's done to you, how he threw you out, he shook his head. There's something more. Something about that fire that never sat right with me. The article said it was arson, Maggie said. That they suspected accelerant. They found evidence of insurance fraud too, Richard added quietly. Someone had taken out a massive policy on the building just weeks before the fire. Someone had changed the beneficiary. The room felt too small, too hot. Maggie pressed her hands to her belly, feeling the baby kick as if sensing her distress. Who? They never proved anything, Richard said. The investigation stalled. But I've spent years digging, hiring the best investigators money can buy. And every trail, every suspicious detail, every inconsistency. He paused. They all circle back to people connected to Derek. Maggie felt like she might be sick. You think he had something to do with the fire? I think someone did. And I think your mother was getting close to figuring out who. Richard leaned forward. She called me the day before the fire. Said she'd found some irregularities in the accounts, that money was going missing. She was worried someone on our board was embezzling. She was planning to bring documentation to the police the next day. But she never got the chance, Maggie whispered. No. And the fire destroyed all the financial records. They sat in silence, the implications hanging heavy between them. Finally, Maggie asked the question that had been burning in her chest since she'd found those photos. Why did you help me? That night in the rain, you could have just called 911 and driven away. Why did you stop? Richard's eyes filled with tears. Because I recognized you. You look so much like her, Maggie. The same eyes, the same way you hold yourself even when you're breaking. And I thought, his voice cracked, here's my second chance. I couldn't save Clara. I couldn't find you when you needed help. But there you were, her daughter, on that curb with your children, and I could finally do something right. You've done more than something right, Maggie said through her tears. You've saved us. No. Richard shook his head. I'm just giving you what your mother would have wanted you to have. Safety. Stability. The chance to thrive. He pulled out a folder from beside the chair. Maggie hadn't even noticed him bring it in. I want to show you something. He opened it carefully, revealing yellowed documents and photographs. These are the original plans for the expanded community center network. Your mother's designs, her vision, her handwriting in the margins. I've kept them all these years. Maggie took the papers with shaking hands. Her mother's neat script filled the pages. Notes about childcare ratios, curriculum ideas, community partnership suggestions. In the margins were little doodles, flowers and hearts and stars. The same ones Clara used to draw on Maggie's homework when she was young. I built the Greenleaf Foundation to honor this vision, Richard said. Every program we fund, every initiative we support, it's all based on what Clara taught me. That real community development isn't about buildings or budgets. It's about people. It's about creating spaces where broken things can grow strong again. The phrase hung in the air, and Maggie realized that's exactly what this house had been for her and her daughters. A place where broken things grew strong. The programs you've been designing, Richard continued. The work you've done these past weeks, it's brilliant, Maggie. You have your mother's gift for seeing what people actually need, not what looks good on paper. I think, he hesitated. I think she'd be proud of you. Maggie broke then, the tears coming in great heaving sobs. Richard moved to sit beside her on the bed, and she leaned against him while he held her the way her mother used to when she was small. I miss her so much, Maggie cried. And I was so angry at her for dying, for leaving me alone. Derek made me believe she'd failed, that the center was her fault, that she'd been irresponsible with money and let people down. I believed him. I was ashamed of her. She didn't fail, Richard said firmly. She was brilliant and brave, and she changed thousands of lives. Someone took that away from her, from all of us. But her legacy didn't die with her, Maggie. It's alive in every program the foundation runs. It's alive in you, in the work you're doing. It's alive in those two beautiful girls sleeping down the hall who are learning to be strong because their mother showed them how. Maggie pulled back to look at him. Thank you. For not giving up on finding me. For stopping that night. For giving us a chance. Thank your mother, Richard said with a sad smile. She taught me that we save each other. That's how communities work. That's how families work. We show up in the rain and we say, I've got you. They sat together in the quiet, surrounded by Clara Morrison's plans and dreams, and Maggie felt something shift inside her. The shame fell away. The guilt lifted. In its place was something stronger. Purpose, connection, the sense that she was part of something larger than herself. Her mother hadn't failed, and neither would she. The call came from the security gate on a Tuesday afternoon while Maggie was helping the twins with an art project in the sunroom. Mrs. Chin appeared in the doorway, her usually calm face creased with concern. Miss Maggie, there's someone at the gate asking for you. Something in her tone made Maggie's stomach drop. Who? A man. Says he's your husband. The marker fell from Maggie's hand, leaving a blue streak across the paper. Maya and Zoe looked up from their drawings, sensing the sudden tension in the room. What does he want? Maggie managed, her voice barely steady. He says he wants to apologize. To see his daughters. Mrs. Chen's expression made it clear what she thought of that. Mr. Richard is handling it, but he wanted you to know. Maggie stood on shaking legs, one hand pressed to her belly where the baby had started kicking frantically, as if sensing danger. Keep the girls here. Don't let them near the windows. She found Richard at the front door, his phone to his ear, his face carved from stone. Through the intercom system, she could hear Derek's voice, slurred and desperate. I just want to talk to her. To my girls. Is that so wrong? A man should be able to see his own children. Stay inside, Richard said to Maggie, but she was already moving toward the door. No. If he's here, I need to face him. Richard's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Together, they walked down the long driveway to where Derek waited beyond the iron gates. Even from a distance, Maggie could see how he'd deteriorated. His expensive suit wrinkled and stained, his hair unkempt, dark circles under his eyes. He looked like a man who'd been living in his car. When he saw her, his face lit up with something that might have been relief or desperation. Maggie. Baby. Thank God. I've been so worried about you. Worried. The word came out sharp, edged with all the anger she'd been holding back. You threw us out, Derek. In the rain. 8 months pregnant with our daughters. I was drunk. I was stupid. I didn't mean any of it. He pressed his face closer to the bars, his hands gripping the iron. I've been trying to find you for weeks. I went to hospitals, shelters, everywhere. I thought something terrible had happened to you. Something terrible did happen, Maggie said, her voice cold. You happened. Derek flinched like she'd struck him. But then his eyes shifted to Richard standing protectively beside her. Of course. You found yourself a rich savior. How convenient. Watch yourself, Richard warned, his voice deadly quiet. Or what? You'll call security? Already did that. Derek's desperation was giving way to something uglier. I have rights, you know. Those are my daughters. That's my baby she's carrying. You can't just keep them from me. You gave up those rights when you put them on the street, Richard said. Derek laughed, but it sounded wrong, manic and bitter. You act so righteous. But I know who you are, Richard Greenleaf. I know all about you and Clara Morrison. Maggie felt her blood go cold. What are you talking about? Oh, he didn't tell you? Derek's smile was cruel. Your mother's perfect partner? Let me guess, he made himself the hero of the story, right? Painted me as the villain who kept you apart. You did keep us apart, Maggie said, but uncertainty had crept into her voice. Derek reached into his jacket, pulling out a wrinkled manila folder. I brought you something. Documents your perfect Richard probably doesn't want you to see. He slid them through a gap in the gate. Financial records from the Morrison Community Center. Proof that your mother and her business partner were bleeding that place dry. That's a lie, Richard said, but Derek was already talking over him. Is it? Then explain why $50,000 went missing in the months before the fire. Explain why your mother took out a massive insurance policy just weeks before everything burned. Explain why the investigation flagged both of them for potential fraud. Maggie bent to pick up the folder with trembling hands. The papers inside looked official: bank statements, insurance documents, investigative reports with words highlighted in yellow. Misappropriation of funds, suspicious timing, potential collusion. These could be fake, Richard said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. Check them yourself. Derek's grin was triumphant now. I got them from the police records. Your mother wasn't the saint everyone thinks she was, Maggie. She was desperate, failing, and she dragged Richard down with her. They were going to lose everything, so they burned it all down for the insurance money. No. But even as Maggie said it, memories surfaced. Her mother in those final months, stressed and distracted, talking on the phone late at night with desperation in her voice. Coming home with tears in her eyes, but insisting everything was fine. The arguments Maggie had overheard between Clara and someone she couldn't identify. We're running out of time. We need to make a decision. Your mother was under investigation when she died, Derek continued, relentless. The fire was just the convenient end to a very inconvenient situation. Ask him. He pointed at Richard. Ask him why he really feels so guilty about Clara's death. Maybe it's not because he failed to save her. Maybe it's because he helped destroy her. Get out. Richard's voice was like gravel. Leave now, or I'm calling the police. Go ahead. I'm on public property. But Maggie, Derek's tone shifted, becoming softer, more reasonable. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But at least I'm honest about my failures. Can he say the same? He gestured at Richard. He's been lying to you from the start, using you to absolve his own guilt. Ask yourself, why did he really stop that night? Why take in a random pregnant woman and her kids? Nobody's that generous unless they've got something to atone for. Maggie clutched the folder to her chest, her mind spinning. You need to leave, Derek. Fine. I'll go. But think about what I said. He started backing away toward his car, parked crookedly on the shoulder. And when you're ready to hear the truth, the real truth, not his version, you know how to find me. I'm still your husband, Maggie. Still the father of your children. That doesn't just disappear because some rich guy decided to play hero. He drove away in a spray of gravel, and Maggie stood there clutching the folder like it might burn her hands. Richard reached for it, but she pulled back. Don't. I need to see what's in here. Maggie, whatever's in there, it's been twisted. Derek is. You need to give me space right now, she said, her voice shaking. Please. She walked back to the house on unsteady legs, past Mrs. Chen's worried face, past the sunroom where her daughter's laughter had turned to anxious whispers. She made it to her room and closed the door before her knees gave out. The folder spilled open on the bed, documents fanning out like accusations. She forced herself to read through them, her heart sinking with each page. Bank statements showing large withdrawals marked administrative costs. Insurance paperwork with Clara's signature, the beneficiary listed as estate of Clara Morrison. Investigator notes suggesting the fire was suspiciously timed to prevent financial audit. It couldn't be true. Her mother wouldn't have done this. But the stress in those final months, the arguments, the way Clara had withdrawn from Maggie, claiming she was just busy with the center. A knock on the door made her jump. "Maggie, can we talk?" Richard's voice, gentle but strained. "Not right now. Please. I need to explain." "Explain what?" She opened the door, the documents in her hand. "Explain why you never told me my mother was under investigation? Why you acted like she was some kind of saint when she might have been stealing from her own community? Why you've been so generous to me? Was it guilt, Richard? Are you trying to buy your way out of whatever happened with my mother?" "It's not like that," Richard said, but he looked stricken. "Those documents don't tell the whole story." "Then tell me the whole story." Her voice broke. "Tell me why Derek has police records that make my mother look like a criminal. Tell me why you feel so guilty you took in a complete stranger and her children. Tell me the truth." Richard opened his mouth, then closed it. The silence stretched between them, and in that silence, Maggie saw everything she'd feared. Doubt. Secrets. Complications she'd been too desperate to question. "I need time," she whispered. "I need to think." She closed the door, slid down against it, and let herself cry. Outside, she could hear her daughters asking Mrs. Chun where Mommy was, why she was upset, if Daddy was coming back. Maggie looked at the documents scattered across her bed, at the life she'd been building in this house, at the trust she'd placed in a man she barely knew. And for the first time since that rainy night, she wondered if she'd escaped one nightmare only to walk into another. The baby kicked hard, as if in protest, and Maggie pressed both hands to her belly. "I know," she whispered. "I know. We'll figure this out." But as she sat there in the growing darkness, Derek's words echoed in her mind. Ask him why he really feels guilty. And she didn't know if she was ready for the answer. Maggie didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Derek's documents spread across her nightstand, questions circling her mind like vultures. By dawn, she'd read through everything 3 times, and each reading left her more confused and more certain that something was terribly wrong. The whether with her mother, with Richard, or with the documents themselves, she couldn't tell. The knock came at 7 a.m. Richard's voice careful and quiet. "Maggie? I have something to show you. Please." She opened the door to find him standing there with his own folder. This one thick and professional, the kind lawyers carry. His eyes were bloodshot, his shirt wrinkled like he'd slept in it. Or hadn't slept at all. "I should have shown you this from the beginning," he said. "I was trying to protect you, but that was wrong. You deserve the truth. All of it." They sat in her room while the house slowly woke around them. Richard opened his folder with careful hands, and what spilled out was nothing like Derek's crumpled documents. These were pristine copies, officially stamped, meticulously organized with colored tabs and handwritten notes. "This is the complete fire investigation report," Richard said, pulling out the first document. "The original, not the redacted version that went to the press. Look at the highlighted sections." Maggie read the investigator's notes. Multiple points of origin. Commercial accelerant detected. Forced entry on east door. Timing suggests premeditation. And then, circled in red. Financial motive unlikely. Center's accounts show healthy reserves, growing community support, recent grant approvals. "The center wasn't failing," Richard said quietly. "It was thriving. We'd just secured a $500,000 grant for expansion. We had a waiting list for programs. Your mother had been approached by 2 other cities wanting to replicate our model." He pulled out bank statements, the real ones with official headers and audit stamps. "These are the center's actual financial records. Every dollar accounted for. No missing money. No suspicious withdrawals. Just a well-run nonprofit serving its community." Maggie's hands trembled as she compared them to Derek's documents. The account numbers were similar, but not identical. The dates overlapped but didn't match. "Then what are these?" She gestured at the papers Derek had given her. "Forgeries. Good ones, but forgeries nonetheless." Richard pulled out another document. I had them analyzed by a forensic accountant last night. The signatures are traced, not original. The letterhead is slightly off. These were created to look legitimate, but they're lies designed to make your mother look guilty. The room tilted. Maggie gripped the edge of the bed. Why would Derek have these? Because he made them. Or had them made. Richard's voice was hard now, anger bleeding through his careful control. I've spent 15 years trying to figure out what happened that night, Maggie. I've hired investigators, paid for forensic analysis, tracked down every lead. And every single trail led nowhere, until you showed up at my gate. He pulled out a different kind of document now: employment records, contractor licenses, insurance paperwork. In 2008, Derek Morrison worked for Midwest Insurance Associates. Not as an agent, as a building contractor and risk assessor. Maggie's breath caught. Morrison. He took my mother's name. He introduced himself to your mother as a family friend of yours. Said he wanted to help with the expansion. Clara was touched. She thought you'd sent him. Richard's jaw clenched. He had access to everything. Building plans. Security systems. Insurance policies. He assessed the center for the new coverage we needed for the expansion. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. He could have changed things. The policies. The beneficiaries. Richard nodded, pulling out more documents. The center's insurance policy was updated 6 weeks before the fire. Standard expansion coverage, or so we thought. But look here. He pointed to a highlighted section. The beneficiary was changed from Morrison Community Center Board of Directors to Clara Morrison, primary, Derek Morrison as secondary contingent. Secondary contingent, Maggie repeated numbly. Meaning if Clara died, he'd get everything. $2 million in insurance money. Richard's voice was shaking now. Your mother never signed this change. I had handwriting experts verify it. The signature is forged. Maggie felt like she was falling, the room spinning around her. But the fire investigation, why didn't they find this? They did. Richard pulled out another document. This one labeled Supplementary Investigation Report, Confidential. They suspected insurance fraud. They suspected Derek. But the original documents mysteriously disappeared from the insurance company's files. Without the physical evidence of the fraudulent policy change, they couldn't prove anything. The case went cold. He stole them, Maggie whispered. He worked there. He could have taken them. That's what I believe. And I think your mother figured it out. Richard's hands were shaking as he pulled out a final document, a photocopy of handwritten notes on Morrison Community Center letterhead. Clara's handwriting, unmistakable. Maggie read through tears. Called insurance company Re. Policy discrepancy. They claim I authorized beneficiary change. I did not. Meeting with DM tomorrow to discuss. Something wrong here. Need to contact police if I can't resolve. The date was March 17, 2008. The fire happened on March 18th. Clara died that night. She confronted him, Maggie said, the words barely audible. She found out what he'd done, and she confronted him. The fire started less than 12 hours after she wrote these notes. Richard's voice was thick with grief and rage. The investigators said it was set between 10 and 11 p.m. Your mother had called me that evening, said she needed to talk urgently about a serious problem with the insurance situation. I was in New York, told her I'd call her back after my meeting. But by the time I called back, he couldn't finish. Maggie pressed her hands to her mouth, fighting back sobs. He killed her. He set that fire knowing she was there, and it triggered her heart attack, and he killed her. I can't prove the murder charge, Richard said quietly. Not yet. But I can prove the insurance fraud, the arson, the forgery. I've been building this case for years, waiting for the right moment, the right leverage. I thought I'd lost my chance when I couldn't find you. But then there you were, his wife, the mother of his children, the one person who could testify to his character, his patterns, his capacity for cruelty. Maggie looked up at him, and suddenly everything made sense. That's why you helped me. Not just because I'm Clara's daughter. Because I'm evidence. No. Richard's voice was fierce. No, Maggie. I helped you because you needed help. Because you were Clara's daughter, and she would have wanted me to protect you. The evidence part, that came later, after I realized who you'd married. After I understood what he'd done to you. He moved closer, his eyes intense. Your mother spent the last hours of her life trying to stop him, trying to prevent him from stealing from the community she'd built. And then he spent the next 15 years controlling you, isolating you, making you believe your mother was a failure. He married you to keep you quiet, to make sure you never went looking for answers about that fire. He never loved me, Maggie said, the realization settling into her bones. Any of it, the whole marriage, it was just damage control. I think he saw an opportunity, Richard said gently. A young woman, grieving and alone, who knew nothing about her mother's work or the investigation. Someone he could control. Maggie thought about all those years. The way Derek had discouraged questions about her mother. How he'd moved them away from anyone who'd known Clara. The subtle ways he'd made her feel ashamed of her mother's failed center. Even the timing of their pregnancies, Maya and Zoe born within a year of their wedding, trapping her further. He used me, she whispered. My grief, my loneliness, he weaponized all of it. Yes. Richard's voice was soft but firm. But that ends now. We have enough evidence to reopen the arson investigation. Enough to charge him with insurance fraud, forgery, possibly even wrongful death. The investigators I hired found witnesses who saw him near the center the night of the fire. Found records of him purchasing accelerant materials. Found proof he filed for the insurance payout within days of your mother's death, claiming to be acting on your behalf as family. Maggie felt something shift inside her. Grief giving way to anger, confusion crystallizing into purpose. What do we need to do? We need you to testify about the pattern of abuse, the isolation, the control. We need you to confront him, with the police recording, and get him to reveal what he knows. Richard hesitated. It won't be easy. He's dangerous, Maggie. Especially now that he knows you're here, that you're learning the truth. He threw me out on the street while I was pregnant, Maggie said, her voice steady now. He terrorized my daughters. He murdered my mother. I don't care if it's easy. I care if it's right. Richard smiled, sad and proud at once. You sound just like her. Good. Maggie stood, placing her hand on the evidence that would finally bring her mother justice. She deserves the truth. The community deserves the truth. And Derek deserves to answer for what he's done. Through the window, she could see her daughters playing in the garden with Mrs. Chun, their laughter carrying on the morning breeze. They deserved to grow up knowing their grandmother was a hero, not a failure. That their mother was strong enough to face her demons and win. When do we start? Maggie asked. Today, Richard said. If you're ready. The prosecutor is prepared to move forward as soon as you give your statement. And I have one more piece of evidence that will seal everything. He pulled out his phone, scrolled to a saved voicemail, and pressed play. Clara Morrison's voice filled the room, preserved across 15 years. Richard, it's me. I found something. About Derek, about the insurance policy. He's been lying about everything. I'm going to confront him tonight, but I wanted you to know, if something happens, if anything goes wrong, look into Derek Morrison. He's not who he claims to be. The message cut off with a fumbling sound, like she'd dropped the phone. That was the last thing Clara Morrison ever recorded. Maggie closed her eyes, listening to her mother's voice, hearing the fear and determination she'd been too young to recognize all those years ago. I'm ready, she said. Let's bring him down. The Morrison Community Center rose from the same ground where its predecessor had burned, but this time it was built to last. Glass and steel caught the evening sun, the architecture modern but warm, welcoming. A banner stretched across the entrance. Grand opening benefit concert, honoring Clara Morrison's legacy. Maggie stood backstage in a dress Richard had insisted on buying, deep blue, elegant, the kind of thing her mother would have worn to important events. Her hands trembled as she adjusted the small microphone hidden in her necklace. Through the curtain, she could hear the crowd gathering, hundreds of people filling the outdoor amphitheater. He took the bait, Richard said quietly, appearing beside her with his phone. He's at the gate. Security is letting him through now. Maggie's heart hammered against her ribs. The baby kicked hard, as if sensing her anxiety. And the recording equipment? Triple redundancy. Audio, video, backup systems. Detective Morrison has plainclothes officers positioned throughout the crowd. The investigator who'll make contact with Derek is already in place. He's playing a developer interested in creative solutions to property acquisition. Richard's voice was steady, but she could see the tension in his jaw. Are you sure you want to do this? We can still call it off. No. Maggie's voice was firm. He needs to see this. Needs to see what my mother built, what he tried to destroy, standing again. He needs to know he failed. Richard squeezed her hand once, then stepped away as the stage manager signaled it was time. Maggie walked to the wings and watched as Richard took the stage to thunderous applause. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here to celebrate the reopening of the Morrison Community Center. His voice carried across the crowd, warm and genuine. 15 years ago, a fire tried to destroy not just a building, but a dream. Clara Morrison's dream of a place where community meant more than geography, where it meant family, support, transformation. Tonight, we reclaim that dream. The crowd erupted. Maggie scanned the faces until she found him. Derek, standing near the back, his expression unreadable. He'd cleaned himself up since his appearance at the gate, wearing a suit that almost disguised how much weight he'd lost. But she could see it in his eyes, desperation wrapped in calculation. Richard continued. Clara's daughter, Maggie Morrison, has been instrumental in designing the programs this new center will offer. She inherited her mother's vision and her mother's heart. Please welcome her to the stage. Maggie walked out into the lights, into the applause, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. Then she saw it, her mother's photograph on the screen behind her, smiling that beautiful smile, and strength flooded through her. My mother believed that community wasn't about buildings, Maggie began, her voice steady despite her shaking hands. It was about people showing up for each other in the darkest moments. It was about saying, I see you, I've got you, you're not alone. She paused, letting her eyes find Derek in the crowd. Someone tried to burn that belief to the ground. But you can't destroy an idea with fire. You can't kill hope with cruelty. My mother's dream survived because people like Richard Greenleaf refused to let it die. She spoke for 10 minutes about the programs the center would offer, about second chances and new beginnings, about rising from ashes. Every word was aimed at Derek like an arrow. When she finished, the crowd was on their feet, and she could see the fury in his face even from the stage. The concert itself was beautiful. Local musicians, youth choirs from the programs the center would support, speakers who'd known Clara. Maggie watched from backstage, her hand pressed to her belly, as the community her mother had loved celebrated her memory. As the event wound down, she saw the investigator, a man in his 50s named Marcus Hayes who looked like any other successful businessman, approached Derek at the bar. Through her earpiece, she heard their conversation crystal clear. Hell of an event, Marcus said, signaling the bartender. Though I have to admit, I'm more interested in the property than the charity work. You in real estate? Derek laughed, already on his third drink. Used to be. Insurance mostly. Risk assessment. Smart field. Lots of money in understanding risk. Marcus leaned in conspiratorially. Sometimes in creating it, am I right? Derek's eyes sharpened with interest. What kind of creating are we talking about? The kind where property values suddenly change. Where failing businesses become insurance opportunities. You know, Marcus shrugged. Creative problem solving. I might know something about that. Derek was warming up now, the alcohol and his need to impress loosening his tongue. In fact, I pulled off the sweetest deal you've ever seen right here. This very spot. Maggie's breath caught. Richard appeared beside her, listening through his own earpiece. This community center? Marcus sounded impressed. The one that burned down? The very same. Derek's voice dripped with pride. Clara Morrison, the woman they're all worshipping tonight, she never saw it coming. Thought she was so smart, so righteous. Building her precious center with her heart. He laughed, cold and bitter. I burned it with my match. Easiest money I ever made. Maggie's hands clenched into fists. Richard's face had gone white with rage. Marcus pressed further. That's bold. Insurance fraud on a nonprofit? That takes planning. Takes access, Derek corrected, his words slurring slightly. I worked for the insurance company. Had all the building plans, all the security schedules, all the policy details. Changed the beneficiary. Made sure I'd get the payout. $2 million for one night's work and a book of matches. What about Morrison? She must have suspected something. Oh, she figured it out. Derek's laugh was ugly. Called me the night before, said she wanted to discuss irregularities. So I showed up at the center that night, Had a nice long chat with her about how she couldn't prove anything, how I'd ruin her reputation if she tried. The stress got to her. Old heart couldn't take it. Heart attack, right there while the building burned. Convenient, right? Marcus let out a low whistle. And they never caught you? Never even came close. I married her daughter after. Kept her nice and isolated. Made sure she never went looking for answers. Controlled her for 15 years. Derek drained his glass. Would still be controlling her if that sanctimonious bastard Greenleaf hadn't interfered. But it doesn't matter. They can't prove anything. It's all recorded, Maggie said, stepping out from behind the nearby hedge where she'd been standing with Detective Morrison and 2 uniformed officers. Every single word. Derek's face went from confused to terrified in the space of a heartbeat. He stumbled backward, but there was nowhere to go. The crowd had gone silent, everyone turning to watch the drama unfold. Maggie walked toward him, her voice carrying across the amphitheater. You killed my mother, Derek. You set that fire knowing she was inside. You triggered her heart attack with your threats and your lies. You stole her dream and cashed it in for $2 million. That's not, I was drunk, I didn't mean. Derek looked around wildly, but the crowd had closed in, blocking every exit. You meant every word, Maggie continued, her voice growing stronger. Just like you meant it when you threw me and your daughters out in the rain. When you called us burdens. When you spent 15 years making me believe my mother was a failure when she was a hero. Detective Morrison stepped forward, badge in hand. Derek Morrison, you're under arrest for insurance fraud, arson, and the wrongful death of Clara Morrison. You have the right to remain silent. This is entrapment, Derek shouted. You set me up. You set yourself up, Richard said, appearing at Maggie's side. We just gave you enough rope. The officers moved in, handcuffing Derek as he struggled and shouted. News cameras that had been filming the benefit swung around, capturing every moment. Maggie stood there watching, her hand on her belly, as the man who destroyed so many lives was finally held accountable. You tried to break me, she said quietly, but her words carried in the sudden silence. You tried to erase my mother's legacy. You tried to make me believe I was nothing without you. But I'm still standing. And so is her dream. The crowd erupted into applause. Someone started chanting justice for Clara, and it spread like wildfire through the amphitheater. As police led Derek away, still shouting, still denying, still trying to manipulate, Maggie felt something inside her finally release. The twins appeared at her side, Mrs. Chun bringing them forward carefully. Maya looked up at her mother with wide eyes. Is that really Daddy? That's the man who was your father, Maggie said gently. But fathers are supposed to protect you, love you, keep you safe. He couldn't do those things. But we're safe now. We're going to be okay. Zoe pressed against her side. Because of Mr. Richard? Because of a lot of people, Maggie said, pulling them close. Because your grandmother taught us that community means showing up for each other. And that's what we're going to keep doing. Richard stood beside them, and together they watched as police cars pulled away, red and blue lights flashing against the new center's walls. The crowd was dispersing now, but people kept stopping to thank Maggie, to share memories of Clara, to promise support for the center's programs. A reporter approached with her camera crew. Ms. Morrison, can you comment on tonight's arrest? Maggie took a breath, looked at the camera, and spoke to everyone who'd ever been silenced or controlled or made to feel small. The truth always finds a way to the surface. Justice might take 15 years, but it comes. And to anyone out there living in fear of someone who's supposed to love them, you're not alone. You're not crazy. You're not the problem. And there are people ready to help you stand up. The footage would be on every news channel by morning. Derek's recorded confession would go viral by midnight. But standing there with her daughters and Richard and the rebuilt center glowing behind them, Maggie wasn't thinking about any of that. She was thinking about her mother. About how Clara would have loved this moment. About how she'd smile knowing her daughter had found her voice, her strength, her purpose. We did it, Mama, Maggie whispered to the stars. We did it. The contraction started at dawn, 3 days after Derek's sentencing hearing where he'd received 25 years for arson, insurance fraud, and wrongful death. Maggie had watched via video link from Richard's library, the twins playing quietly nearby, and when the judge read the verdict, she'd felt the baby kick as if in celebration. Now, 3 months later, she held her son for the first time in the same hospital where she'd almost lost him. But this time there was no fear, no stress, no danger. Just Richard standing beside her hospital bed with tears in his eyes, and Mrs. Chun cooing over the baby's tiny fingers, and the twins climbing carefully onto the bed to meet their brother. "What's his name, Mommy?" Maya asked, stroking the baby's downy hair with gentle reverence. "Morrison," Maggie said, her voice thick with emotion. "Morrison, Richard Morrison." Richard's breath caught. "Maggie, you don't have to." "I want to," she interrupted. "He's named after the two people who saved us. My mother's legacy and your kindness. He carries both." The baby Morrison, her miracle, opened his eyes and looked at her with Clara's dark gaze, and Maggie felt the last piece of her broken heart click into place. 2 weeks later, the Morrison Community Center held its official grand opening ceremony. The building gleamed in the October sunlight, twice the size of the original, with state-of-the-art classrooms, a commercial kitchen, a computer lab, a gymnasium, and a library named after Clara Morrison. The foundation's funding had been generous, but the community had raised money too. Thousands of small donations from people who remembered Clara, who'd benefited from her programs, who wanted to see her dream realized. Maggie stood backstage in the same blue dress she'd worn the night of Derek's arrest. But this time she held Morrison in a wrap against her chest while Mrs. Chun helped the twins into their matching dresses. They'd been practicing their song for weeks, determined to perform for the grandmother they'd never met. "You ready, baby girls?" Maggie asked, kneeling down despite the baby's weight. "We're going to make Grandma Clara proud," Zoe said seriously. "You already have," Maggie assured them, "just by being brave and kind in yourselves." The ceremony began with Richard's introduction, then testimonials from community members about what the original center had meant to them. An elderly woman spoke about learning to read in Clara's literacy program at age 62. A young man credited the center's after-school program with keeping him off the streets and helping him get into college. A single mother talked about finding job training and childcare support that changed her family's trajectory. Then it was Maggie's turn. She walked to the podium with Morrison sleeping against her heart and looked out at the hundreds of faces. Some she recognized from old photographs, others new but connected by the same vision her mother had held. "My mother taught me that community is built on love, truth, and second chances," Maggie began. "This center represents all three. Love, because Clara Morrison poured her heart into creating a place where everyone mattered. Truth, because we refused to let lies erase what she built. And second chances, because every person who walks through these doors deserves the opportunity to write a new chapter in their story." She paused, her voice growing stronger. "Someone tried to destroy this dream 15 years ago. They thought fire could burn away hope, that fear could silence truth, that isolation could break our spirits. They were wrong. We are here today because my mother's vision was bigger than one building, stronger than one tragedy. We are here because people like Richard Greenleaf refused to let her legacy die. And we are here because this community chose to rise from the ashes together." The applause was thunderous. Richard stood off to the side, his face reflecting pride and something deeper. Grief finally transmuted into purpose. "And now," Maggie continued, "my daughters would like to honor their grandmother with a song they learned. Maya and Zoe Morrison, everyone." The twins walked onto the stage holding hands, and Maggie's heart swelled. They stood before the microphone looking so small and so brave, and when they began singing, a simple song about light overcoming darkness, about love being stronger than hate, there wasn't a dry eye in the crowd. Richard joined Maggie at the side of the stage, and together they watched the twins sing. "Clara would be so proud," he whispered. "She would be proud of you too," Maggie said. "You kept her dream alive when I couldn't, when I didn't even know I should." After the twins finished to enthusiastic applause, there was the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Maggie stood with Morrison in her arms while Maya and Zoe held the oversized scissors together, counting down with the crowd. 3, 2, 1. The ribbon fell away, and the Morrison Community Center was officially open. People flooded inside to tour the facilities, children running through the gymnasium, adults marveling at the computer lab, everyone stopping to read the memorial wall where Clara's photograph hung above the words. She believed community could change the world. She was right. That evening, after most of the guests had left and the twins were with Mrs. Chen getting ready for bed, Maggie found a letter waiting on Richard's desk. The return address made her stomach clench: State Correctional Facility. Derek's handwriting, as familiar as it was unwelcome. She opened it with steady hands, ready for whatever manipulation he'd attempt. The letter was 2 pages of carefully crafted words designed to sound remorseful, while actually blaming everyone else. He claimed the confession was coerced, that he'd been drunk and didn't mean what he said, that Maggie had abandoned him in his time of need. He wrote about missing his children, about wanting to be part of Morrison's life, about how families should forgive. The final paragraph made Maggie's jaw clench. You and those kids need me, Maggie. Richard might have money, but I'm their father. Don't let him poison them against me. I made mistakes, but I still love you. Think about what's best for our family. Maggie read the entire letter aloud to Richard, her voice steady and cold. Then she called the twins downstairs. Girls, I need to show you something important, she said, sitting with them on the couch. Morrison dozed in his bassinet nearby. This is a letter from Derek. He's trying to make us feel bad for him, trying to make us think we need him. I want you to understand what this is. It's manipulation. It's lies dressed up as love. She read them selected passages, careful to shield them from the worst parts but honest about the patterns. See how he says, I made mistakes, but never says what those mistakes were? How he blames me for his choices. How he says he loves you but doesn't take responsibility for hurting you. Maya frowned. That's not a real apology. Exactly, Maggie said. Real apologies acknowledge harm and commit to change. This is just words meant to control us again. What are you going to do with it, Mommy? Zoe asked. Maggie stood, folding the letter carefully. We're going to burn it. They walked out to the center's memorial courtyard, where a fire pit burned for evening gatherings. Richard had designed this space with Clara in mind. Benches arranged in a circle, native plants in the gardens, Clara's favorite quote etched in stone. We rise by lifting others. Maggie held the letter over the flames. This represents the lies we refuse to carry anymore. The control we refuse to accept. The fear we refuse to let define us. She dropped it into the fire, and they watched the paper curl and blacken and turn to ash. Gone, Maya said with satisfaction. Gone, Maggie agreed, pulling both girls close. Back inside, Richard was waiting with something wrapped in tissue paper. I've been saving this for today. I think you're ready for it now. Maggie unwrapped the package carefully, and her breath caught. Inside was a leather portfolio, worn but preserved, filled with architectural drawings in her mother's hand. The original plans for the Morrison Community Center. Not just this building, but the network of centers Clara had envisioned. 5 buildings spread across the city, each tailored to its neighborhood's needs, all connected by the same philosophy of community empowerment. She drew these herself, Richard said quietly. Stayed up nights perfecting every detail. This was her 5-year plan, the one we were about to implement when the fire happened. Maggie traced her mother's handwriting in the margins, the notes about accessibility and cultural sensitivity, and making sure every community member felt ownership. We could still do this, she said suddenly. The foundation has resources. I have time now. We could build all 5 centers. Richard smiled. I was hoping you'd say that, because I already started the paperwork for the 2nd location. The final gathering of the day happened at sunset. Maggie stood in front of her mother's memorial plaque with Morrison in her arms, Maya and Zoe on either side, Richard just behind them. The bronze plaque bore Clara's photograph and dates, and beneath it, she taught us to build with love. Her legacy lives in every life she touched. Community members had left flowers and notes throughout the day. Children from the after-school program had drawn pictures. Adults had written memories. The memorial had become exactly what Clara would have wanted. Not a monument to grief, but a celebration of impact. Maggie shifted Morrison to one arm and placed her free hand on the plaque. She taught me to build, she said quietly, though her voice carried to the small group gathered around them. He tried to destroy, but we rose from the ashes, and we brought her dream back to life. Inside the center, music started playing, a youth choir practicing for their first performance. Children's laughter echoed from the gymnasium. Adult learners' voices drifted from computer classes. The food pantry volunteers called out inventory numbers. Life, abundant and joyous, filling every corner of the building. Look, Mommy. Maya pointed toward the center. Grandma Clara's dream is everywhere. It is, Maggie agreed, tears streaming freely now. And it always will be. Richard stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. You did this. You and those girls and this baby, you're her legacy. We're all her legacy, Maggie corrected, looking around at the thriving community. Everyone who chooses to build instead of destroy. Everyone who shows up for someone else. Everyone who believes people matter more than profit. That's what she taught us. Morrison stirred against her chest, making small, contented sounds. Her daughters pressed close on either side. Richard stood steady as always. And all around them, Clara Morrison's dream pulsed with life. Bigger and brighter than one building, stronger than any attempt to destroy it. Maggie had started this journey on her knees in the rain, broken and alone with nowhere to go. She ended it standing tall, surrounded by love, holding her children close, leading an organization that would touch thousands of lives. From ashes to light, from despair to purpose, from victim to victor. She'd found her voice, her strength, her mother's legacy alive in her own hands. And she would spend the rest of her life making sure no one else had to kneel in the rain before finding help. The sun set behind the Morrison Community Center, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange, like fire, but this time carrying only warmth and promise. Welcome home, Mama, Maggie whispered to the evening air. We kept your dream alive. And in the laughter of children, and the hope in adult learners' eyes, and the warmth of community gathered together, Clara Morrison's spirit smiled back.